This week I've been thinking about names and about how Jesus calls Mary by name in the garden and she recognises him because he calls her name. And I've been thinking about that in relation to our small communities where we might know a higher percentage of people than we would in larger communities, but do we know them really well enough? I mean, there might, in the communities where I work, there are people who aren't there very much. How do we get to know people? How do we get to know their names so that we can invite them to join in our church community? We had quite a heated discussion at a PCC meeting in one of the PCCs I'm part of not long ago, where I suggested that people should actually invite the people that they knew in the village to come to some of our festival services, like Easter, for example. Could you ask someone to come to church at Easter or at Christmas? Now, one person who admittedly doesn't come to church very often but is a member of our PCC said that there was no way that he would invite his next door neighbour to come to a church service. That was entirely inappropriate, and that if he tried to do that, his neighbour would tell him to go away in an impolite way. But I'm just thinking, how do we know people so that we can say to them by their name, would you like to come to this? Would you like to join in something? Would you like to come to the church service? Would you like to come to our Easter service? How do we get to know people by name so we can ask them to join in our church community, and we can help them to listen for when Jesus is calling their name? Thought for the week this week is thinking about some of the things that happen in the John chapter 20 reading for Easter that we're having this time in our church communities. It's a reading of the discovering of the resurrection. In it, it's the one where Mary hangs around weeping in the garden, and then Jesus comes across her and he calls her name. So part of the things that we're going to be thinking about this week are about the fact that Jesus called her by her name. She was stuck in a cloud of despair and a cloud of grief, of despondency, that she couldn't recognise who Jesus was through her tears, and Jesus has to call her name to make her be able to see him through that cloud of grief. But we're also going to think a little bit about other clouds, and in the Bible what it's been like, what clouds have been there for good and for ill. So if we think way back to the story of the ark and Noah, then God uses a cloud to make a rainbow, and that's the ancient Near Eastern symbol of peace with his people. God is with his people in a pillar of cloud during the Exodus story. So that's a whole other cloud thing that's going on there. Clouds come into all sorts of parts of the Bible, all sorts of other stories. There may be some other examples that you can think of. But coming back towards Easter, we know it got really dark in the afternoon of Good Friday. We don't know how cloudy it became, how dark it became, and we're not quite sure what caused that, but I kind of assume it was a big cloud that did that, and there were clouds around the Transfiguration as well. But Easter, darkness on Good Friday, cloud of despair time, and yet Jesus, when Mary is trying to cling on to him, Jesus talks about it's too early to do that, and we know that Jesus is going to ascend into the clouds, and he's going to come again in the clouds. And that's one of the difficulties with Easter. It's a great part in the story, but it's not the end of the story. It's not anywhere near the beginning of the story either, but it's not the end of the story, because we have the Ascension and the Pentecost story to come. So we have Jesus going up into the clouds and the Holy Spirit coming to be with his people, as well as Jesus' promise to come back in the clouds. Mary is told by Jesus not to hang on to him in his resurrection body. That's quite interesting. It's really hard to understand. Sometimes people want me to be able to explain the resurrection molecule by molecule, and I can't do that. I mean, in some ways it is all as mysterious as clouds. I can't explain molecule by molecule what happened in the resurrection. There are various options, but it is something which I can't explain. But I don't think I need to be able to explain that either. So we have those kind of tensions. But we know that Easter comes in this part of the story where Jesus, as a resurrected person, is going to be able to do all sorts of different things. He's going to be able to eat, he's going to be able to cook, he's going to be able to walk through walls and through doors, and time and the laws of physics are not going to seem to apply to him at this point. But when he's telling Mary not to hold on to him, because she wants to cling on to him once she's found him, and it's because this isn't the end of that part of the story for him. He will end up going back to the clouds himself with ascension, and that is to do with the whole part of the story which is still yet to come, about how God can be with each of us everywhere. So he asks Mary not to cling on to him in his resurrected body as it is, because by the time we get to Ascension and to Pentecost, then the plan, God's cosmic plan to allow all of us to cling to him, will be fulfilled. So whilst Jesus recognises Mary, he calls her by her name, he brings her out of her cloud of despair. The cloud that has this silver lining is not just a cloud for her, it's a silver lining for her, it's a silver lining for everyone. So Mary can't cling to him at that point, because Jesus is making it possible for everyone to be able to cling to him later. This week's Dibley Moment of the Week is about names, and it's about from the time I was running a toddler group, and we had a little boy who was about 18 months old when he started coming, and he looked absolutely identical to my friend who's George, who was that age at that point. He just looked an absolute dead ringer for this little boy, and I would often mistakenly call him George, and as he got a little bit older he'd say Charlie, and I go, oh Charlie, yes, not George, Charlie. And just every time that I made the mistake and called him George, he so looked like George, he would go Charlie, and I would be like, then we got after a little while I got to know him a bit better, and I would call him Charlie, who really looks like George, and he would just smile at me and laugh and get on with what he was doing. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week, and that you can all see Jesus and not the clouds. You can all hear him calling your name.